You know, I have spent many years watching people torture themselves over the simplest things. A missed appointment becomes a catastrophe. A disagreement with a neighbor turns into sleepless nights. A single mistake at work transforms into evidence of complete failure. And I ask myself, when did we decide that life must be so terribly complicated? I remember sitting in my study one evening, watching the shadows lengthen across the floor, and it struck me how effortlessly the light moved, how naturally darkness followed without struggle or protest. There was no drama in this transition, no urgent need to control or manipulate what was simply happening. Yet, we humans, we have made an art form of fighting against the very flow of existence itself. There is something profound happening here that we refuse to see. We have constructed elaborate prisons for ourselves and then spend our days complaining about the bars. We create complexity where none exists, manufacture crises from ordinary circumstance, and then wonder why we feel so perpetually exhausted. But what if I told you that this entire struggle is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what life actually is? Most people live as though they are the director of some grand theatrical production, frantically trying to control every actor, every scene, every moment of the performance. They believe that happiness depends on getting everyone to follow their script, that peace comes from having everything arranged exactly as they think it should be. But this is not how life works. This is not how the psyche operates. This is not how consciousness unfolds. I have observed something curious in my practice. The patients who suffer most are not those facing the greatest external difficulties. No, the ones who suffer most are those who cannot accept that life is largely beyond their control. They exhaust themselves trying to manage outcomes they have no business managing. They create elaborate strategies to avoid experiences that are simply part of being human. They turn natural processes into problems that must be solved. Consider how a child plays. Watch them closely. They do not agonize over whether they are playing correctly. They do not create committees to analyze the proper method of enjoyment. They simply play. They laugh when something is funny, cry when something hurts, and move on to the next moment without carrying the weight of the previous one. Somewhere along the way, we convinced ourselves that this natural simplicity was naive, that maturity meant making everything more difficult than it needs to be. The unconscious, you see, operates with remarkable efficiency. It does not waste energy on elaborate planning or endless worry. It responds to what is actually happening, not to what we imagine might happen or what we think should happen. It processes experience directly, without the interference of our complicated mental constructions. Yet, we have learned to distrust this natural intelligence in favor of our anxious, controlling, conscious minds. I think of the farmer who plants seeds in spring. He does not stand over each seed demanding that it grow faster, arguing with the soil about its methods, or creating complex theories about why some plants thrive while others struggle. He plants, he waters, he waits. He trusts the process because he understands that growth follows its own rhythm, its own laws. His job is not to control nature, but to work with it. But we modern people, we have forgotten this fundamental truth. We believe we must orchestrate every detail of our lives, predict every possible outcome, prepare for every conceivable problem. We live in a constant state of emergency, treating ordinary challenges as existential threats. We make plans for our plans, backup strategies for our backup strategies, and then wonder why we feel so disconnected from the actual experience of living. There is a kind of violence in this approach to life, though we rarely recognize it as such. When we insist that reality conform to our expectations, when we demand that other people behave according to our preferences, when we treat every deviation from our plan as a personal attack, we are essentially waging war against existence itself. And in this war we are always the losers, because reality always wins. I have sat with hundreds of people who were destroying themselves, trying to control things that were never theirs to control. The woman who could not sleep because her adult children were making choices she disagreed with. The man who developed stomach ulcers worrying about economic conditions he had no power to influence. The couple who fought endlessly because each expected the other to fulfill needs that no human being could possibly fulfill. What strikes me most about these situations is not the suffering itself, but the unnecessary nature of it. These people were creating their own torment by refusing to accept what was already true. They were like swimmers fighting against the current, exhausting themselves in a battle they could never win, when they could simply turn and move with the flow of the water. The psyche has its own wisdom, its own timing, its own methods of healing and growth. But we interfere constantly with our anxious interventions, our urgent need to fix and control and improve. We are like gardeners who dig up their plants every day to check if the roots are growing properly. Our interference becomes the very obstacle to the natural processes we claim to want to support. I remember a patient who came to me in great distress because her life was not unfolding according to the timeline she had created for herself. She should be married by 30, she should have children by 32, she should own a house by 35. Every deviation from this arbitrary schedule felt like failure, like evidence that something was fundamentally wrong with her existence. But life, I told her, does not read our schedules. Life has its own rhythm, its own intelligence, its own perfect timing that we cannot see from our limited perspective. The great tragedy is that while we are busy complicating everything, while we are constructing elaborate defenses against experiences that might actually teach us something, life is passing by unnoticed. We miss the sunset because we are worried about tomorrow's weather. We fail to hear our children's laughter because we are planning their futures. We cannot taste our food because we are reviewing the mistakes of our past. This is not living. This is a kind of sleepwalking, a perpetual state of emergency that prevents us from ever truly arriving in the present moment. And the present moment, I have discovered, is where life actually happens. Not in our memories of yesterday or our fantasies of tomorrow, but right here, right now, in this breath, in this heartbeat, in this simple fact of being alive. The strangest thing about human beings is how we have convinced ourselves that suffering is sophisticated. We wear our worries like badges of honor, our stress like proof of importance. We have made complexity a virtue and simplicity a sign of ignorance. But I tell you, this is backwards thinking of the most dangerous kind. I watch people in my consulting room, and they arrive carrying burdens that would break the back of an ox. But when we examine these burdens closely, when we unwrap them layer by layer, what do we find? Most often, we find nothing but air, phantoms, elaborate constructions of the mind that have no more substance than morning mist, yet they consume entire lives. There was a merchant I knew who spent sleepless nights calculating profits he had not yet made, worrying about losses he had not yet suffered, planning for contingencies that existed only in his imagination. His actual business ran itself quite well. His employees were competent, his customers satisfied, his accounts in order. But his mind, his restless, fearful mind, created a second business made entirely of anxiety. And this phantom business required far more energy than the real one ever did. This is what we do. We live in two worlds simultaneously. There is the world that actually exists, with its natural rhythms and organic unfolding, and then there is the world we create in our heads, full of should-haves and what-ifs and endless complications that serve no purpose except to keep us busy, avoiding the simple truth of what is. The unconscious knows better. Deep in the psyche, there is a wisdom that understands the fundamental simplicity of existence: birth, growth, love, loss, death. These are the great themes, the essential movements of life. Everything else, all our elaborate decorations and complications, they are like costume jewelry on a goddess. They obscure rather than enhance what is already perfect in its natural form. I have noticed that the happiest people I encounter are often the simplest, not simple-minded, you understand, but simple in their approach to living. They do not create problems where none exist. They do not manufacture emergencies from ordinary events. They meet life as it comes, respond to what is actually happening rather than to what they imagine might happen. There is a baker in my neighborhood who rises before dawn every day. He mixes flour and water, kneads dough, tends his ovens. His hands are rough from years of work, his back bent from leaning over bread. But his face holds a contentment that I have rarely seen in the drawing rooms of the wealthy or the lecture halls of the learned. He has found something in this simple rhythm that eludes those who complicate everything they touch. What has he found? He has found the secret that we have forgotten. That life is not a problem to be solved, but an experience to be lived. That fulfillment comes not from getting everything we want, but from wanting what we already have. That peace is not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of acceptance. We modern people have developed a peculiar disease. We believe that every emotion must be analyzed, every impulse controlled, every outcome predicted. We treat our inner lives like scientific experiments that must be monitored and adjusted constantly. But the psyche is not a machine. It is more like a garden that grows best when we provide the basic necessities and then step back and allow nature to work. I think of the mother who cannot let her children make their own mistakes, who hovers and interferes and manages until she has created precisely the weakness she was trying to prevent. I think of the lover who analyzes every word, every gesture, every silence until he has dissected all spontaneity out of the relationship. I think of the artist who becomes so concerned with technique that she forgets the joy that made her want to create in the first place. This is the great irony. In our effort to control life, we squeeze all the life out of it. In our attempt to perfect everything, we destroy the very imperfections that make existence beautiful. We become so focused on the destination that we miss the entire journey. We become so worried about living correctly that we forget to live at all. The child does not worry about whether his play has meaning. The bird does not question whether her song serves a purpose. The flower does not analyze whether its beauty is justified. They simply are what they are, fully and completely, without apology or explanation. And in this simple being, they achieve what all our complicated striving cannot accomplish. They achieve presence, they achieve authenticity, they achieve peace. But we adults, we have learned to distrust this natural way of being. We have been taught that everything must be earned, everything must be justified, everything must serve some grand purpose that we can articulate and defend. We have forgotten that the deepest purposes are often the ones we cannot explain, that the most meaningful experiences are often the simplest ones. I remember sitting by a lake as a young man, watching the water lap against the shore. I was not thinking about anything in particular, not solving any problems, not planning any futures. I was simply there, present to the moment, aware of the sun on my face and the sound of water moving. And in that simplicity, I understood something about existence that years of study had not taught me. I understood that being alive is enough. That consciousness itself is the miracle we spend our lives overlooking while we chase after lesser things. This understanding, this recognition of life's essential simplicity, it does not come through thinking. It comes through stopping the endless chatter of the mind and allowing ourselves to sink into the direct experience of being here, being alive, being human. It comes when we finally exhaust ourselves with complexity and surrender to the fundamental truth that has been waiting for us all along, for us all along. The truth is, we have been conditioned to believe that depth requires complexity, that wisdom must be difficult to obtain. We create elaborate theories about happiness when a child discovers it in a puddle after rain. We build intricate philosophies around love when two people find it simply by looking at each other without masks. We construct complicated spiritual practices to find what was never lost in the first place. I have watched this peculiar human tendency for decades now, this compulsion to make the simple profound and the profound complicated. A man will spend years in analysis, trying to understand why he feels empty, when the answer is often devastatingly simple. He has forgotten how to be present to his own life. He has traded his natural connection to existence for a collection of roles, expectations, and borrowed ideas about who he should be. The psyche, in its deepest layers, operates with childlike directness. It does not need our permission to dream, our approval to feel, our analysis to heal. It simply does what it does with the same natural intelligence that grows our hair and beats our hearts. But we interfere constantly, like nervous directors trying to improve upon a perfect performance. I think of the businessman who came to see me, convinced that his recurring dreams of flying meant he was losing his mind. He wanted me to stop the dreams, to return him to what he called normal sleep. But those dreams were not his enemy. They were his psyche's way of reminding him that he once knew how to soar, before he learned to crawl through life weighed down by obligations that were not even his own. So perhaps today you might step outside and simply breathe, not to solve anything or improve anything or become anything other than what you already are. Perhaps you might remember that you were born knowing how to live before you learned to complicate it. The flowers in your garden are not trying to be better flowers. They are simply flowering. And you, my friend, you are simply human. That is enough. That has always been enough.